Alright lads, welcome back to another Dauntless video. Today I've got you a interrupting slash booping guide for you for every single behemoth currently in the game so far. Yes, this covers all Umbral and Sporestruck variants also. Yes, I understand that there has been a lot of content creators really covered this topic, but there's been quite a lot of comments in my previous videos asking me to cover this video. So I thought, you know what, why not? Also, I think the newer players need to understand the mechanics of interrupting and why it's so important. This is why, obviously, Overpower is so good in the game, because what Overpower doesn't actually tell you in the cell is when you actually interrupt a behemoth, this actually counts as a staggered state, which obviously is the definition of Overpower. You get increased damage when you put a behemoth in a staggered state. So regardless, I'm going to start off with the first kind of booping, and that will be the damage threshold boops. And after I've covered all of those behemoths, I'm going to go on to the normal standard move interrupt based behemoths. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you do enjoy the content, please consider subscribing. It helps me a lot. Also, if you like this video, obviously give it a like as well. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. Starting off with Koshai with the damage threshold boop. It actually has two boops what you can do to Koshai. First one obviously being when it's enraged, it will go into this sort of twisty snake form. Just do as much damage as you can and you will land the interrupt. Just be careful of the vines when they come down after you do land the interrupt, because if you get hit, you will be on the floor for a long time. Koshai can also be interrupted right at the beginning of the fight. You can either use a concussion grenade like this, or you can use an interruptible move, i.e. an axe throw, a heavy striker combo, a chain blade, reaper's dance, whatever you wish, but it's quite a hard interrupt to hit, so I do advise running an axe or also a concussion grenade. Moving on to Quillshot, when he's enraged, you'll have a small window to land a interrupt when he launches spike into the sky. Make sure you do the damage roughly 2 seconds when he does launch his quills into the sky, otherwise you might not meet the damage threshold and you will just miss the interrupt altogether. Moving swiftly on to Skarn. It's quite hard to bait Skarn into the interrupt, but when he does eventually go onto his back legs, you can land any attack you wish. I recommend a heavy attack to land the interrupt, but be quick or else you will just miss completely and then he will just slam down on you. Moving on to Valomyr. Explaining his interrupt is quite hard because there isn't no real indication of it, but to do an interrupt for Valomyr, it is pretty simple, but at the same time it's also annoying. So the best way for me to explain it is when he goes enraged like this, dodge the enrage. You want to land heavy hits, or an axe throw will be great, and then a high damage attack will get him out of the state he's already in, and that will be an interrupt. Moving on to Malkarion, the last damage threshold behemoth. You can bait him right at the beginning of the fight if you wish, and you would get this particular animation. If you're in a team, you can do attacks. Heavy attacks would be the best, or an axe throw. But because I'm on my own, I don't land the interrupt, obviously, and I die. Malkarion also has a more frequent interrupt, which happens quite a lot within the course of a fight if you do drag him on. He will back up and he will do this rush attack. Just dash towards him with an interruptible move and you will land the boop. Also, this is quite a difficult one to time without trading, but the more you play with Malkarion, the more easier it gets. I recommend doing the ability, if you're using chain blades, dashing and attacking right at the last moment. Moving on to our behemoths, which only can be interrupted via a moveset. Umbral Koshai, very similar to normal Koshai, can be interrupted right at the beginning of the fight via concussion grenade or by an interruptible move. The other way to interrupt Umbral Koshai is to obviously do an interruptible move or a concussion grenade when he goes underground. This one's quite hard to land, so I do recommend using concussion grenades. Next up is Gnasher, and the best way for me to explain to get an interrupt on Gnasher is to stay as close as possible as you can to its head. You won't always get the interrupt because his moveset is triggered quite randomly, as you can see right here. But when you do get the interrupt, it will look a bit like this. My tip for booping Gnasher is to, when he does do this animation, to roll through his first slide, and when he comes back for the second, then land the interruptible move. This boop is quite difficult to land, so obviously practice makes perfect, but obviously, as previously mentioned, just use a grenade if you're struggling. Moving on to Shrike, he will give you boops throughout the fight, but there is only one way to 100% bait the boop, and that is after his enrage. After he does, he will give you the interruptible move. This can be done via any move or concussion grenade. Axe throw is best, so is chain blades, but I do recommend getting as close as possible to him, or else you might trade the interrupt because his hitbox is utterly huge. Moving on to the most self-explanatory interrupt is the Embermane. All you've got to do is get his notice from him, and then he will start running at you and feeding you consistent interrupts. The best way to land these are very similar to Shrike's. Just do the interruptible move when he gets really close, or you might risk trading the interrupt and dealing damage to yourself. Moving on to Embermane's cousin, Sporestruck Embermane. Make sure you do land the interrupt right at the beginning of the fight, because he is a pain to deal with otherwise. He does give you random interrupts throughout the fight, but I do suggest landing the first one, or else you're going to have a really tough time. But if you do land the first interrupt at the beginning of the fight, you can chain break and stagger him to death straight away. Moving on to my favourite behemoth, Pangar. He will always give you an interrupt if you stand right centre in front of him, but quite far away. He will give you 1 to 2 of these boops before his enrage, and then after this happens, if you haven't killed him, then he then gets another chance to give you 2 additional interrupts. Just a quick side note, if you do miss your 2 chances of interrupts, you won't get another one until the enrage happens, as I just said. But regardless, I think 2 is quite enough. As you can see right now, he's enraged and there's another interrupt. He's quite a self-explanatory fight and quite easy to interrupt in my opinion. Moving on to one of those high risk behemoths which does not stop, and a high chance of trading the interrupt. At the beginning, if you stand back, let him throw his icicles at you, he will give you the interrupt symbols above his head. He will then glide towards you, allowing you to get a free interrupt on him. This is crucial to killing him really quickly, because he is really difficult when you do let him go enraged, because he starts flying about. And as everyone knows, Skraev has no chill. Moving on to Umbral Nayzaga and Nayzaga. I thought I'd only just show you Umbral Nayzaga because they both give you similar boops. Umbral and normal Nayzaga will give you a normal boop right at the beginning. You can then give him an interrupt via an interruptible move. This gives you great uptime for overpower right at the beginning of a fight. Also, the additional interrupt you get for Umbral Koshai is that he will give you this boop as well. On his first and third appearance coming out of his little zone, you can then interrupt him. That is the first and third. His second and fourth will be his shadow clone. Just keep that in mind when you are trying to interrupt Umbral Nayzaga. Time for some fly squatting now. Kharaback, with the addition of his added interrupts, whenever he flies at you, you can interrupt him. The best way to bait is when he's enraged. He will then fly away, and then on his way back, just land the interruptible move via axe or any other way. I think this is quite hard to land when you are new to the game, so maybe concussion grenade might be your best option. Stormy Boy is up next. He has 3 interrupts, but his classic one is his portal warping ability. When he comes out, just land an interruptible move. I like throwing an axe right at the time when he comes through. It feels really satisfying. Interrupt number 2 for Stormclaw. This is quite a hidden one. Not everyone knows about it. But also, when he hits the balls at you, if you want to actually avoid them, like this, He then starts running towards you, and that's an interruptible move. But I actually missed, but I thought I'd show you guys anyway. His final interrupt is when he starts jumping around like crazy, and right on the last attack, he will give you a leap interruptible move. Just land an attack like that, like doing so. Or obviously, I think the best way for this one is definitely throwing an axe. But chain blades and strikers work really, really well also. Moving on to a Riftstalker, he gives you an interrupt straight away. He will jump through a portal. Make sure you hit this, or else you're going to have a long fight ahead of you. Riftstalker also gives you another interruptible move when he's in his shadow zone state. You will see these orbs come through to you, and then as you can see, one of the portals will bright up purple, and I think the best way to interrupt him is via a axe throw. Moving on to Shrowd, he will only give you an interruptible move when he goes into his shadow clone state. The way you know he's about to give you the interruptible move is he would do this. He will then go towards one side of the zone and then come back to you with the interruptible move. I think Axe is really, really good, but I also think Chain Blades and Strikers is probably top tier for booping Shroud, in my opinion. Moving on to Thrax, he has 2 interrupts, and I forgot to add it earlier on. The second one being his damage threshold one when he eats you up. But the normal interrupts he gives you is right at the beginning of the fight. He will usually do that little goo move and then this move. And then normally he gives you the boop then, but sometimes he wiggles away. But regardless, line up for the interrupt. You'll be able to land it as so. He does give you the interrupt pretty quickly after as well, so you can line up a second interrupt straight away. Normally it comes after the stagger and you've done a bit of damage. As you can see right there, I've landed a stagger. After this slam down attack, he will more than likely get ready to do another interrupt. You can always tell because after he does this attack, he will always give you an interrupt. Last but not least, we have Torgodoro. To this day, I have no idea how to bait his interrupt, but when you do, you best be ready to land the interruptible move. He will do a spinning helicopter move. Just land the move on his toes and he will go on the floor. This is quite a nice time to get an overpower state, because otherwise you'll only be landing an overpower state when you get the part breaks, which are pretty hard, and the stagger. If you haven't got any amps, it can be quite difficult.